Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you here at the 11th event in our Outcomes Estimation Tools Training webinar series. And this time we're featuring the Cool Farm tool that was designed to help quantify greenhouse gases, biodiversity, water use, and food loss and waste. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Michaela Perez, Water Initiative Director for American Farmland Trust, and I'm joined by my colleague, Water and Soil Health Specialist, scientist Aisha Ross. For those of you who don't know, American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit founded in 1980, and our mission is to save the land that sustains us by 1, protecting farmland, 2, promoting sound farming practices, and 3, keeping farmers on the land and preparing the next generation of farmers. So for today's webinar, after a few reminders and a quick poll to see who's in the room, we will hear from Michaela Aschbacher. I've never even confirmed if that's the correct spelling, so please disabuse me, Michaela.
It's okay.
Pronunciation. Who is the Training and Consultancy Manager with the Cool Farm Alliance. And she'll first lead us in a presentation of the Cool Farm tool, followed by a demonstration of that tool. And finally, we reserved the last 15 minutes for Q&A, and we'll pause for Q&A, technical Q&A between the presentation and the demonstration. We want to thank our funders, the EPA Office of Water, the Walton Family Foundation, and the Mosaic Foundation for making this webinar series possible. Aisha.
Okay, well now for some quick housekeeping reminders. So we're using the Zoom webinar platform for this series. So as attendees, you will have your camera and microphones turned off throughout the event. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen at any time to ask questions, and the speaker will answer the questions during the last 20 minutes of the event. And then we're also doing a Q&A in between their talk and demonstration. You can use your name or be anonymous when asking questions or making comments. If you like a question someone else has asked, you can vote it up so it can be prioritized. We also do have the capability to unmute you, so please indicate in the question if you would like to ask it yourself. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can direct message me and I'll try and help you. Following each webinar, you will receive an email within 3 to 4 days that will provide the recording and the slides for the presentations, as well as information about the next month's speaker. And by the following Monday, we will post the recordings to the webinar registration page, which we absolutely welcome you to share with your colleagues and friends that may be interested in viewing. And I'm sharing that link right now. And in a moment, I will be sharing a link to an 8-question anonymous evaluation survey that it's actually, it can be anonymous if you want it to. We do ask for your name in that survey as well. That should take about 2 minutes to complete. The survey will pop up when you leave, but you can also click on it now so it opens in a new tab on your browser. We ask that you please complete the survey right after the event ends. Our presenters and the AFT team rely on these surveys to help inform our next month's speaker and any changes we might need to make to the webinar series. And given the low participation rate in the past, we now offer an incentive, which is why we asked for your name and email address, which we started a few months ago. Everyone who fills out a survey today before 6 p.m. Eastern will be entered to win a $25 Visa gift card, and the winner will be notified by email tomorrow morning. So we appreciate your participation and wish you luck in the drawing.
Great. So I was just going to share that link then to the survey, and then we'll start a quick poll to see who's in the room. So everyone, fill out the poll as soon as you can, so we'll get it out of the way. We'd love to know which one sector best reflects your occupation. Are you associated with a government agency at the federal, the state, or the county level? Are you with a non-government organization, a farm trade association or an environmental group, for example? Are you associated with academia? Are you a corporation or an environmental markets developer or other? The second question is, if there are only 4 types of audience members, which one best describes you? Are you a developer of outcomes estimation tools, methods, or models? Are you a current user of those outcomes estimation tools, methods, or models? Are you a potential future user? or are you a person generally interested in learning about outcomes estimation tools and issues? And the third and final poll question is, what is your experience level with the Cool Farm tool? Have you heard of it? Have you heard of it but never used it? Have you heard of it and used it? Do you refer to it often? Thank you for taking this poll. We usually try to get to, what's our participation rate?
Over 90. So
Yeah.
just a few more people and we'll be there.
Yay. Thank you, everybody.
We'll give it another 10 seconds and then I'll stop it.
I always think of the Jeopardy theme song here. All right, so the majority of you, nearly 50%, are with a government agency, followed by equally non-government organizations and academia, and then a few corporations or environmental markets developers. That's cool, and others. In terms of the four audiences, the majority are persons generally interested in learning about outcomes estimation, then current users of estimation tools, and potential future users. That is cool. All right, in terms of Cool Farm tool, had not heard of it. All right, well then you have come to the right spot. And some of you had heard of it, not used it. Some of you, 5%, 8%. I refer to it often. That is so interesting and cool. All right, well there we go. Thanks for taking that poll. All right. So this is the registration site that Aisha shared in the chat previously. So you can encourage your friends to come to this site. You can see the schedule and you can get the recordings. And you'll see here that we have links to, there we go, to recordings, including the most recent February 7 Fast GHD webinar. Next month, we're going to be joined by Tate Wentz, Shannon Phillips, and Leif Steinberg with state departments of agriculture from Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Illinois River Watershed Partnership. All three of them are going to give us a talk on critical source area targeting. And it's going to be an exciting event. And this is something that many of you who filled out the needs assessment said you were interested in. So how do we think about planning and implementation of conservation in critical source areas within watersheds and use watershed-based management planning to encourage farmer practice adoption and achieve desired outcomes. We're excited to announce a new addition to our 2024 training on September 4. We'll have our very own, AFT's very own Ben Wierzinski, an ag economist, and Shelley Maples, also an ag economist, and Meng Lee, a senior soil health scientist, present on our brand new Predictive Soil Health Economic Calculator tool, or our PSHEC tool, that is set to be released this summer. And so folks who are interested in helping farmers understand what their potential 10-year future economic benefits might be from adapting one or more soil health practices, this might be a great webinar for you. And you can see that in July and August, we have TBDs. So we are reaching out to several additional tool developers, and we're going to be excited to release them and announce them soon to you. All right. Oh, now I get to turn it over to Michaela. I'll stop sharing my screen. Yes.
I'm going to start sharing my screen. Hopefully that works all right.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you both, Michelle and Aisha. It's great to be here today and also see this audience. All of you, thank you for taking the time and joining us in this session on the Cool Farm tool today. My name is Michaela Aschbacher. I'm the Training and Consultancy Manager of the Cool Farm Alliance. I'm based in Seville, in Spain, in Europe, and part of a small team. Most of our people are in the UK, and we also have one of our colleagues, Daniela Malin, who's located in Vermont, working for the Sustainable Food Lab. Yeah, I'm focusing mainly on preparing training resources and learning resources for our members and users, because one of the main things and important thing for us is that users already know what the tool is about and how they can use it accurately. I have a background in cultural studies, languages, and also worked before in voluntary sustainable certification programs and development work. Today, I'm going to focus the presentation on the Cool Farm Alliance, just to give you a little bit of an understanding where this all comes from. Tell you more about the scope of the Cool Farm tool, so you're very clear of what expects you and what you can use it for. We're going to show how to interpret and compare results, so certain functionalities that you can use for what-if scenarios of conservation practices that are implemented. And also through a live demo, show you how you can measure effects of conservation practices. Finally, we also have a feature of aggregating data and making reports on project level, so looking at outcomes from different accounts and getting them all together. And we also prepared or I prepared some project examples and overview of the cost and resources that you can use for the tool. The Cool Farm Alliance is a membership organization. So currently we have about 159, 160 members from across the globe. And it's really from the start of the food supply chain throughout the end, really pharma associations, NGOs, consultancies, manufacturers that are in this alliance, and they kind of all come together with the same idea of accelerating regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture in their supply chains, and using the Cool Farm tool for that. So the idea was from the start, from kind of the founding organization Unilever, who came in 2000 and after the report of the International Panel of Climate Change was launched, and they took this scientific knowledge and got together with the University of Aberdeen in the UK and said, we want to use this knowledge. We need to develop something that can be used on the farms directly, to translate it into a hands-on tool that we can use around the globe to assess greenhouse gas emissions. And so they also gathered together with the Sustainable Food Lab, as I said, and which specifically said, you're not alone there. We should bring everybody together and sit at the same table and develop this together, have the same knowledge when we talk about climate mitigation, and so work on this tool together. And this is what has become the Cool Farm Alliance with all these member organizations. We have a use of the tool across the globe, as I said. There is maybe a bit of a focus in Europe because that's kind of where it was developed and was coming from and first piloted and started. But you have an uptake actually around the globe, quite a strong one in Asia that has been was rising in the past years. And there is also used in North America, of course, and in South America. This kind of overview of where it is used is based on the web users that we have registered. So it's a web tool, but there is also a way of how you can connect to the tool via an API, so a programming interface that allows other data collection softwares, management softwares that have farm data at hand to connect with the Cool Farm tool and then do the calculations outside of the tool. So using it just as a calculation engine. And we have quite some members, which we're going to show you in examples, that use this, and therefore the user usability and users that we have in America could actually be quite essentially larger than what we have in this overview. One of the things I wanted to mention, and I saw that Professor Green Ketterlings was also in the audience, if I saw correctly, so great to have you there. A thing that certainly for us is crucial is that we have scientists and experts backing whatever we're doing. That was from the principle a very important part, and for us it's an honor that we have a great group of scientists on our side that really gather on a monthly basis and a regular basis and take a crucial role for us in making strategic decisions of how science and methods in the Cool Farm tool is developed. This is for us important because it makes it credible, it makes it a transparent tool so we can talk about it and also show how we are working on developments and improvements of the tool, which is overviewed and overseen by these scientists that we have. Going to the co-farm tool, so defining it within one sentence, I think Michelle has mentioned this already, but it's a quantified decision support tool for the measurement of impacts on the ground of agriculture practices. And it focuses on mainly on greenhouse gas emissions, but we also calculate water efficiency and biodiversity. Looking at the principles, I mentioned the strong basis in science. We want to have it a scientifically robust tool, but at the same time, it's kept very simple. So that's often the feedback we hear from users. It seems simple, very straightforward, because we wanted it also to be farmer focused. So whatever we ask for is data farmers would normally have at hand. So it doesn't need expensive other investments on analysis, soil analysis, etc. at the moment. It is industry owned, so really the members who actually own the tool in their own way, but that's important for us as well because it gives us a link to the markets and what is important nowadays in markets in the industry when it comes to greenhouse gas assessments. And what I mentioned already, it's a global tool and it has different pathways and metrics. What does that mean? It shows in the next slide that actually the scope of the tool has different pathways. So we have a crop pathway and dairy and livestock pathway and a biodiversity pathway. When we talk about crops and dairy, you would make a product level assessment. So you assess greenhouse gas emissions for crops and for dairy or beef, and you would do it specifically for the crop. So for milk or specific crops that you can select for. Also, when we talk about water, you can assess that for crops and it would look at the water quantity used for the crop production. And then there is a fine tuning, which I'm going to mention later a bit more detail about a new perennials model that we have developed. When we look at biodiversity itself, again, that's a farm level assessment. So it goes away from the product and looks at the management on the whole farm and how that affects biodiversity in different biomes. So it's available specifically for temperate forest and also Mediterranean areas. Now I have two slides prepared that kind of give a little bit of an understanding of the background of the methodology of the tool. I'm not going to go into detail because it might sound a little bit complex, but certainly it's important to mention that as many of the tools out there, we base our science mainly on the International Panel of Climate Change report, so IPCC 2019. And also for dairy, we have the International Dairy Foundation guidelines that we have taken into consideration. And also, often there is a question of how precise and complex the tool is, and this is normally defined by tiers of IPCC. And so we have a tier, normally use a mix of tier 1 and 2 methodologies. So the basic level, and in certain ways, we ask a few more detailed methodologies. A big question is always, what about carbon sequestration, right? Everybody wants to talk about that. So certainly that is a model that's now currently on a basic level, so a tier 1 model, but here we're going to do a lot of work to have a tier 2 to 3 model in the coming years. So it gives you more insights and more precise outcomes of the carbon sequestration potential on farm. And the same goes for the greenhouse gas protocol. That is a thing, and I give you the 3 scopes and just the points here. Those are scopes that are defined and very important for companies. We always talk about scope 1, 2, 3 reporting, scope 3 reporting to look at emissions from a whole supply chain. And so the tool covers all of them in a certain way. So you will find direct emissions that happen through practices on farm, but there is also indirect emissions, scope 3 emissions, as we call them, that we consider. So if we indicate that we apply fertilizers, we also for these fertilizers consider the production emissions that occur when you use such fertilizers in your farm. And yeah, and just as a final point, there is a guidance that is going to come up that we also are working on to be consistent with that guidance. You can review it, and I have added here a link for more information on the land sector removal guidance. That's how it's called. This is quite an intense slide, so it has a lot of information. But I think it's quite a good summary of what I've mentioned before, and for everybody of you who may want to use a tool for greenhouse gas assessments that work in different regions with different crops, etc. And I think this gives you quite a good overview of that. So what I mentioned already, we have product level assessments for crops, and that can be done for greenhouse gas and water. And the same goes for livestock. Also, it is kind of focused on a field level. So when you make a crop assessment, you indicate a growing area, but you can combine fields, of course, into one. And also you can combine different assessments that you make throughout a whole area, different fields, different farms, and make assessments and comparisons also on a state level. So if you really want to, for example, make a footprint of potato or wheat in Iowa, that can be done also with the Cool Farm tool. I mentioned that biodiversity is done on farm level. So we really look at any kind of activity on the farm. And then there is some specificity on the site itself. So the Cool Farm tool asks quite granular information about your soil, where you are located, the climate that you're in, and those kind of conditions make it very specific to your conditions, and then emission factors are adapted according to those indications. And the same goes for livestock assessments. We ask you about how you manage your herd and different animal categories you are. So in that case, it can become very specific to your own conditions. The outcomes you get from the tool are quite straightforward. In greenhouse gas emissions, you get different greenhouse gas breakdown of the sources of your emissions. These are broken down into CO2, nitrous oxide, and methane emissions, the most important ones. And in the future, we also have more disaggregation according to the greenhouse gas protocol. They have developed more fine-tuned emissions that are CO2 emissions, non-CO2 emissions, biogenic, non-biogenic. So not going into detail, but that's what's coming up as well. Certainly what you can see is carbon sequestration. This has always been a thing in the tool we reflected. You can monitor over the time increase in your soil organic carbon. That's an outcome that you can monitor. And there is also a nitrogen use efficiency KPI, a number that you can find within your assessment results. When it comes to water quantity, we basically look at the crop water consumption, so how much irrigation has been added. We look at the precipitation, and at the same time, this is combined with the crop water requirements, and with that kind of gives you then a water footprint of the quantity for water. Biodiversity itself has many different outcomes. It's actually a score that you get, and the score shows the beneficial effect of different practices on species groups that you have in your own biome. Exactly. So it's kind of a scoring system, and it also shows habitats percentage you have on your farm. When we look at conservation practices, what can you do in a tool? Maybe as in many tools, if you have seen other ones, certainly what we can reflect is if you reduce your tillage practices, this you can reflect. Improve nitrogen management. And what I mean there is specifically how you improve the use of fertilizers on your field and reduce nitrogen containing fertilizers. You can show carbon input increase. So anything you add to the soil, you can reflect that you use cover crops, you add manure, you add compost or residues to the ground. You can show also in lower footprints by having a healthier crop and therewith also a higher yield. So intensify your yields. You can show irrigation efficiency. So certainly that can also be monitored over time. And you can also show whether certain areas in your growing area on your fields has been reforested. So any kind of land use change. And if you add additional trees. This is mainly for crops. There might be other smaller details. If you have anything that you would like to know, if it's possible, you can put that in the Q&A and we can see if that's covered. But I think those cover the main important ones that we can reflect. For livestock, often we talk about improved herd and manure management. Of course, how you manage your manures to use more sustainable and more efficient systems that reduce methane emissions. How you improve your herd management, that you have a healthy herd, and then also where you get your feed items from. So if they come from deforested areas, those kind of things you could actually monitor with the tool. And for biodiversity, it's a great catalog of conservation practices. So basically, it's a whole thing. The whole questionnaire is all of the things that you can improve on the farms. And just a few examples are to diversify the species you have, install food nests for pollinators, add water courses and habitats to your farm. I've mentioned the perennials pathway. So that is something where we basically looks like it's coming from the crop assessment that we have. But it focuses much more on how such a perennial system is normally built up. So if you would work with almond farmers or citrus farmers somewhere in the US, this could be used, and it's a fantastic new methodology that is quite particular and I think unique in that sense. And what new features there are, you have much more capability of show how residue is managed, other options of type of agroforestry, if you have additional hedges that you grow, any type of intercrops that are in a farm, because that often happens as well, that there is multiple crops on a farm. And so that's going to come up this year. We're working on it and going to launch it at the end of March. So this is exciting for us. And then, of course, those kind of the improvements that we make in this pathway, we will see that we bring this in also later on. So in 2025, not only our new soil organic carbon model that I mentioned before is going to come in, where you can look more at how much biomass you actually add to the ground. So more specificity on that. On those kind of conservation practices, we will have that available in the future. And also, as I said, some improvements that come in with perennials. Again, looking at the scope of the tool, what does it cover? It's a global tool, so actually can be used anywhere in the US if you want to use it. There is no limitations. There is only one thing that you see in the line before. It's not adapted to polar regions. So there's very few parts of Alaska, for example, that wouldn't be covered, but in general, most likely they're not cultivated. So it can be used anywhere and can be used for any type of crop. So really can reflect either the crop is specifically listed, or you can work with crop families that are defining characteristics of your crop. And again, here, what I mentioned, it's made for crops that are grown in mineral soils. So if you have organic soil, so that's really quite rare in the US, but if you have organic soils with more than 12% soil organic carbon, which is more than 20% soil organic matter, such as peatlands, for example, this tool wouldn't be your tool. But it's rarely the case. So it's important to know that. And yes, it's certainly a tool that is focused on soils, as I said. And so non-soil or hydroponic systems can currently not be reflected in the tool. Finally, last point of this slide, it's about how much time do you need? Well, it's actually the preparation of the data. It takes most time. So we have also an Excel file for you, a list of all the things that you would need to collect. But in general, it's really farmers should have those data at hand. They should know their soil conditions. They should know what fertilizers they apply, what kind of electricity they used, etc. So you would have those data at hand. And then filling in a tool is actually quite straightforward and should take about 10 to 15 minutes. And also over the years, it's coming faster and faster. You can create copy of assessments, so you don't need to re-enter the data. And so the next time is going to be much more, the second and the continuous times of assessments is much easier. And yeah, certainly, as I mentioned before, field level. So don't be scared, because fields can still be, combined into one assessment. They don't need to be, if you have different fields, you don't need to assess them separately, but can combine them in one if they have the same soil and characteristics and management style. Finally, we have this wonderful slide about the strengths and limitations. So certainly, just again, as a repetition, it's a free for farmers tool. So farmers themselves really shouldn't pay and should use this tool for their own understanding and make a decision-making process of what GHG emission means on their farm and how they can use it to mitigate climate change and let's say the effective practices affecting greenhouse gas release. But if you work in projects, if there's project money and you work with farmers together, this would be covered by the project fee. So we take away the burden from farmers, and it's taken up by us, by companies and project leaders and managers. In that sense, it's very simple to use. I mentioned that. So it's limited data, but still scientifically robust and credible. It's US wide, and therefore actually also we have imperial and metric units, both of them applicable. So you will have that as well. And also it's a user-friendly online interface. So we don't need to download the software. You can use it online. And we also work now on a new interface, our platform that should be even better. So we really take away information that is not needed and help you to fill in defaults that are already there. So we have this already. I mentioned the site-specific analysis. So we take granular data when it comes to local weather data, and also these default ranges that we have available if you might not have precise data at hand. You can aggregate data, and I will show you that later on. And also finally, it's good to mention that there is actually a course that you can take if you really would like to use this tool and work with the tool. We have a certified advisor course that gives you really a full understanding of the training. So that is available for you, and anybody can sign up for that. The limitations of the tool, again, as I said, it's not made for organic soils, not for non-soil systems, and for these polar regions. When it comes to livestock, you could actually assess all types of livestock, not just dairy and beef. However, dairy and beef are the models that we have updated. And for other livestock, such as swine, chicken, the methodology is outdated. So it's there, but we recommend not to use it until we are going to update it. That is in process. It's just kind of a matter of funding until we get this done. And so when we get that over the line, it's available also for any type of many other livestock systems. Rotational grazing is also often, of course, a conservation practice. This is something we do not really monitor. So grazing is a part of livestock, but not rotational grazing and how that affects your soil carbon stocks. This is not included in the tool. The water quality assessment is not possible, so we really focus just on quantity. There is no offline use of the tool possible because it's an online tool. The whole farm analysis needs multiple assessments. And that means if you have different crops, if you have one farm with one crop, of course, then there is one assessment to be made. But if you have multiple crops, you would need to combine them. That sometimes is a downside specifically for other tools that might include several crops at once. And then, so data analysis and also benchmarking comparisons are not available in the tool itself. So it's something that needs to be done then later on by product managers outside of the tool once assessments have been made. So I would like now to go more into kind of the phase where I describe you and show you how the tool works. Not sure if there is any question that we would like to already answer now. Otherwise, we would do that at the end in the Q&A section. If there is not.
I think that's good to keep going. There are 2 questions, but we should get a little bit more of a background on the tool before we turn to them.
Okay, perfect. Great. So I'm just going to show you quickly these slides. These are more for your information if you want to go back to them. It just shows you an overview of what you can expect when you make a crop assessments. The data we ask from the users are basically made for these 7 tabs. So we look at the crop, the production, the yield you have, and your residues, soil characteristics, fertilizers and pesticides you apply, so the inputs of that, any kind of energy use you have in a farm, and also, again, irrigation. So irrigation can be, if you want to, you look at water quantity, you can show that here. But you also have irrigation, the energy of irrigation. You have the carbon tab that mainly focuses on those conservation practices, and then the transport section. For livestock, it's again, at the beginning, what does the production do? What is your milk yield or like the live weight added for beef systems? We look at the herd management, what kind of animals you have there, the grazing time spent, the feed consumed, so all different kind of feed items, and then manure management. finally, again, also the energy and transport section that you can expect. And for biodiversity data, as I mentioned this, it's really a whole farm assessment of what type of products you farm, the farming practices you implement, and the habitats you have on the farm. If you then would just look at the interface, this is what you can expect. I'm going to show you this in a second. So we have this interface. On the left-hand side, you fill in the data. On the right-hand side, you have a live summary that continuously updates with your data changes. So this is this fantastic tool that can be used for creating what-if scenarios. So what if I would reduce my fertilizers? I would start doing tillage practices. This is this very added value live summary that you have there. The final results show in graphic displays. On the top, you have immediate graphic kind of display of the main hotspots on your farm. Mainly, often it's fertilizers for crops, and then broken down, as I said, for the greenhouse gases and some other graphic display that you can use for individual assessments. A water footprint would look that way. So you get, in the end, I said, the productivity, irrigation efficiency. So combining your local precipitation and irrigation, combining that into one, and then see if it's good and how you can also improve those values. So certainly gives you an indication on that. And the biodiversity score I mentioned before, here you have the species group. So really see how flora and fauna are affected by the actions and the habitats you have on the farm. And yeah, one thing I wanted to mention before we go into the tool, when we talk about this what-if scenarios, there is an option for each assessment to be saved as a duplicate. I can show you in a bit how that is working. And so by doing that, you can compare a duplicate, then simulate the conservation practices you would like to take up with your farmers or with your project group. And then you can put them together in the tool. You can actually compare them with each other. And that can be done either for the same, for what if scenario, so what would happen, but you can also with that compare your baseline assessment and future assessments with each other to see where the changes in your emissions. So it's really graphically displayed in the tool itself for two assessments. You can do that. I'm going to go and share. I think I need to stop sharing my screen and move around and go to the online page where I have the Cool Farm tool open. Let me just quickly do that. I think it should be here. Can you see the tool itself? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes. That's right.
Okay,
and you might want to make it a little bit, as big as you can. Great.
Yes, exactly. I'm just going to zoom in a bit. So quickly showing you what the tool looks about. You have already seen the interface. And as I said, we're moving to a sleeker interface in the coming year. So really excited to have that as well. And in general, I've mentioned, so the tool is actually available in different languages. If you work with other, for example, Spanish-speaking people or other languages, you would have that. But the main tool, the main language is English. You have at the beginning the farm settings. So those are, this is important because whenever you make assessments, you would like also to reflect in what kind of settings you're located. So you not only indicate the country you're located in, but the latitude and longitude are information that give understanding of kind of where your farm is. So we take weather data based on those information. The climate information is very important. The annual average temperature, these kind of information are also considered when we make a footprint. And there is a functionality which can activate for project use that you can create different farms. So if you would have different climatic and temperature conditions, you can create different farms. And so these then affect always the assessments that you make for a specific region. So these are the farm settings. Also here to mention the technical description. This is all our methodology. So you find that directly in the tools. You can go and dig deeper in there if you're interested in it. We have a My Project section. So this is just a section where we can enable features for you if you have a project, and that would be the multiple farm feature, for example, or also having an export of assessments, and specifically making the limitations of assessments larger. So you really can make as many assessments as you want, or at least as much as we defined in the project scope. The aggregation functionality I'm going to show later on, because that's what I'm talking about when you use the tool on a product level. On a project level, this is what you can use it for. And then we have the My Assessments tab. So any assessment that you have made before. So if you want to start an assessment, you can choose, I'm going to show you a little bit the crop footprint and a livestock footprint. And exactly, so you can start it here from the landing page or from the top. By selecting crops, you can choose the metrics that we have. And I'm going to show you now. So either you select greenhouse gases, but also adding water would open up, as you can see here on the bottom, additional questions that are marked with a drop. So you can really see what kind of questions are affecting the water footprint. I'm going to actually show you an assessment. I'm not going to go into detail in water. I can show you that later on. So firstly, I would like to show you a greenhouse gas assessment and show you that in a bit. So the same structure as you have seen before, I've prepared one for you. The main thing is if you go into the tool, you will have help text everywhere, sometimes for the specific section that explains you what you should enter, what is expected, what type of data is expected from you. And also next to each field, you also have these important info buttons that are helpful. So when we look at the crop drop down, I'm not sure if it actually shows. I had sometimes the issue that I'm not sure if you can actually see the drop down. Michelle, can you confirm that, or maybe not?
Yes, fortunately we can.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. That's good, because there's other tools where actually the drop down doesn't show. So what I said before is that it can be used for any type of crops, right? So, I mean, of course, these are not all the crops that are out there, but of course, the main crops that people use or farmers have, and specifically because for these crops, there are emission factors available that affect your N2O emissions and from residues, for example. If this is not available, then there is crop families. So because it's still sufficiently precise, you would just gather them and say, if I don't find it in this list, I can take if I have legumes, for example, or forage or root crops, you could just choose one of those families on the button and then make an assessment for them. The same for vegetables, for example. You don't need to specify I grow salad and I grow rucola, but you actually can combine them in one assessment. We look at the crop area where these crops are grown, the harvested amounts, and also the farm gate ready amounts after drying. So all of these things can be entered. You have here a drop-down menu again to work with different units. And please excuse if I don't have acres here. I know that's much more applicable. So I just have assessments, but of course acres are also available when defining the crop area. And then looking at the crop residue amounts, it's a value that is calculated from the tool. So this is, again, one of the first data that the tool already provides to you, because you might not have the data at hand. But also you can also always reset whenever you change your harvest amount, etc. You can use a reset button to get these default values. And otherwise adjust the values yourself. So before we had, I think, 12.837 indicated, and that will be the value that you can adjust. And then there is specific management types, so how you manage your residues, and this would change your residues management ad hoc. So again, what I mentioned before, normally it's left distributed on the field. And also you could show whether you use it for forest aeration. You see using compost, actually emissions from residues increase drastically. So this is how you can see immediate changes in your results. When I go to the next tab, these are the soil characteristics. Here we look at the soil texture, the soil organic matter value. We give you some default ranges because sometimes you might not have the precise value. A farmer doesn't have a precise value, but there is ranges that you can work with. If you have a custom value to make the footprint more granular to your system, then you can indicate this custom value and tell us the soil organic matter that has been measured X years ago. So maybe 1 year ago on your farm can be entered here by yourself manually. The tool then calculates the soil organic carbon content for you. We talk about soil drainage and soil pH currently. And I think those certain information won't be necessary in the future anymore for the methodology we have. And then we move on to inputs. I think that is certainly one of the, let's say, important sections, because often we see here we have quite large emissions for a crop coming from fertilizers. When you indicate a fertilizer, you would choose from a drop-down list of different synthetic fertilizers that are quite often used in agriculture. You also have some natural, some organic fertilizers, mainly coming from manure and digestate, that you can choose here. And if you wouldn't have the fertilizer in this list, you could also choose an option. I'm going to actually create a new entry. Oh, we have one here as well. You can use your custom NPK blend. So this is often, if you don't find the exact thing, you can actually indicate a blend of a fertilizer that you use by indicating the N, the P, and the K composition of such a blend. When we talk about fertilizers, one of the certain things I mentioned before is the production emissions of fertilizers. So changing, let's say, your manufacturer, the sourcing region where you get your fertilizers from, that can change emissions as well. And exactly, we also look at how much you apply, what kind of nitrogen, if you apply it as a product of its nitrogen application, so you can specify if that's rather something that you know how much nitrogen you actually applied, then this can also be entered. We look at how it is applied, what kind of method you use for it, whether it's broadcasted or applied in solution. And then we have this date of application. This is an option to make footprints again more granular, because we look at a specific precipitation at the moment of application, and so how the nutrients were taken up by the soil. And you can also leave it unknown, which just takes then a general assumption of uptake of this fertilizer. And also what you can indicate as emission inhibitors for fertilizers. When it comes to crop protection inputs, is of course a little bit more easier. We just choose when the pesticide was applied, what type of pesticide is what was, whether fungicide, herbicide, and how much you applied of this product on the growing field. So everything is always related to the crop data you entered in the first place. And then the active ingredient of your product. When it comes to fuel and energy, we look at, so kind of, we have in the first place, we have quite specific information. So you have clear indications of how much energy, grid electricity you use, the kilowatt hours in your facility. And here we're talking about the field and the facilities on the farm. So whether you had cooling systems, storage systems, housing for animals, for example, all of those things can be covered in here, but also any type of machinery. So fuel use for all your machinery. And so we have levels of diesel, petrol, etc., all of those kind of energy indications that you have that might be applicable. And you can indicate those specific values. And I think this is the most precise way of how to indicate electricity. If this is too complex and you don't have those values, there is a second part where you can indicate what type of machinery you used. And then the tool would calculate the useful for you. So this is one of the features that sometimes farmers like to use because that's easier, because they know how often they drove a specific machine over their ground. And so the tool gives them the indications of fuel used for them. There is a wastewater emission section. I'm not going to go into that, but at least you can indicate certain information of how wastewater that applies, for example, for coffee farms specifically, or other kind of wheat, barley crops. If there's any wastewater pool standing, then you can indicate that here and calculate emissions resulting from that. Then we go on to the irrigation section. It's actually quite straightforward. You have two ways of indicating it, just by saying how much volume you added to your fields, or also including the pumping depth and horizontal distance. So you can go fine tune it a bit more if you want to. And in general, if we would go for volume only, you say events here. So by selecting an event and then the method you used for it, let's say a drip system, imagine, then you can just indicate the volumes of liters added. And specifically when you talk about water, the water footprint, water quantity, you would really indicate week by week how much water you added to your farm. And again, also here, we just talk about water source and the power source. And power source specifically, we have electricity, diesel, or gravity. And so it's important to understand that if you do not use anything related to water quantity, so that is not a KPI, anything you need to cover, then you do not necessarily have to fill out this section, because it looks at the energy used for irrigation. So if you use the pump, any kind of diesel or electricity, you can also include that already under fuel and energy. So that's important to mention. When we go to the carbon tab, we have, so that's the most interesting part. Is actually a very complex tab. So hopefully I can summarize this in a simple way. And basically what it does, we look at different changes that happen in the past 20 years. So that's our starting point. Any kind of management change that you have introduced in the past 20 years, conservation practices, those are relevant and can be included in here. If they happened longer ago, because of course we had some pioneering farmers out there, that's really remarkable, but still you wouldn't be indicating such practice changes anymore if they're longer than 20 years ago, because then after 20 years, IPCC methodology assumes that there is a new soil equilibrium. So management changes, even if you continue to do so, wouldn't affect any carbon release or carbon storage, right? So this is why this 20-year time frame is for us. And we'll use a linear approach. So depending on what you indicate here, what kind of practices you implement, it calculates the potential of carbon sequestrations for this 20-year time frame, and then splits it up linear, divides it by 20. So a linear breakdown of these carbon sequestration potential to each year. As we say, we're assessing here a product footprint, and that is an annual footprint. So it's a yearly footprint for, let's say, the whole harvest cycle. And therefore, this annual breakdown is applied. And this actually comes back to a question that has been raised. What about permanency? So again, here you should consider certain practices just if it's really permanent changes. So for tillage, for example, if you move back and forth of tillage practices, then you shouldn't rather include this in this section. So really, we talk about permanent practice changes that you include. Another mentioning here, so another thing that is important, that practices should happen at least 3 years in order to qualify. So if you do it at least every 3 years, for example, you grow at least every 3 years cover crops for more than 6 months, so that's another factor, then you can indicate, hey, I started to use cover crops in my production system. And so actually this helps you with crop rotation. So here we are assessing one specific crop, but at the same time, you have to consider that maybe management practices do not relate only to the crop, but mainly to the field or your farm where you are at. And so if we have different crops following each other, we still consider if we have a crop rotation of 3 crops, in the 3 consecutive years, at least for one of those, you should implement a practice in order to fill out this section. Exactly. And then the final thing, very complicated thing, is that we move backwards. So we always look at what was your most recent change, And because that's the most important one, that's the most recent one. And then we also look what has happened before, because also those prior practices might affect your carbon stocks you had at the beginning of your most recent change. And so how does this look like? So long story short, how would I choose, how would I reflect and measure conservation practices in the tool when it comes to tillage and land use change and carbon inputs? So I would indicate how many years ago I started to make this change. Here on the top, if I look at, I make here, this was an assessment of my 2018 harvest. So great, I'm in the 20-year time frame. So I indicated actually 2003, I started to use cover crops, right? So that's something I can indicate here. First, I always need to fill out all the 3 sections here. I think we also going to change this in the future to make it more user-friendly. So not everything needs to be filled out, but currently we would say it has been cultivated land, so I didn't change this. I always had full tillage in that case. And when I used carbon crop, I changed the C input level. So the carbon that I actually brought back into the soil. And so you have different, you can see we actually have 4 categories. And here it's very advisable to go to the info button. You have low carbon C input. So that's mainly crops where you take all the residues away. The ground is bare for at least 6 months. And really low yielding crops. So really you take more carbon actually away from the soil than you actually have there when you grow a plant. So that's low carbon input. A medium carbon input would be if there's cereals and you return certain residues to the ground, the status quo more or less stays the same. So you grow some plants, but you also return some of that biomass back into the soil. And so that would be a status quo for a medium carbon input. The high carbon input would be if you really start to use cover crops on top of those residues returned to the ground. And then high carbon inputs, inputs with manure. So on one side you have that without manure, and then with manure if you really have regular manure applications happening on the farm. And by manure, we do not mean just slurry, because that sometimes is not really very intense and very good carbon that you return to the soil. But yeah, it's something, and one of the things that is very important is to click here, because we have a decision tree for you that helps you to go really through the different scenarios of the status you come from. So what have I done before I started to feed cover crops into the soil, and then where I go to. So the status quo. And for cover crops, if you had some fertilization happening before in your annual crop, and then you would start from a medium C input and go into a high C input. So use this decision tree, and certainly this will be helpful to understand what kind of selection you should make. As you can see, by doing that, I actually have some carbon negative numbers here. So this is the carbon stored in the soil. As I said, the potential we can assume happens over 20-year time frame, and then broken down for this 1 year. And the same would go if I would say, okay, at the same time, actually, I started to change my tillage practices from full to reduced or no tillage. If I selected, you could see that my sequestration potential increases. So this is how you would reflect those conservation practices in the tool. And for land use, you can also show, for example, if you have moved some cultivated area you have into a set-aside area, so just not doing anything with it, or if you create a forest again with it. And then here we would just say what kind of forest type you would grow, and that would give you again quite a great benefit and carbon storage for your soil. And last but not least, so ready to move on, because we still wanted to cover the livestock assessment as well a bit, is that you have the opportunity to show if you have additional trees that you grow on the field. So that can be trees for birds, shade trees, etc. And also for this, you can show us if you have added new trees to the growing area, and also how the growth of those trees are. So this is measured biomass increase on the field. There is a very limited number of trees. We hope to increase that, but for example, just hardwood that you have. And so you can see what was the density last year and how the size increased over the years, as well as new trees that you had. So this can be also shown, as I mentioned, in the tool. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on. I hope that this showed a little bit all the practices that we can do. I think before we mentioned the fertilizer section, so I indicate the type of fertilizer I used and then how I can reduce them. So I can show also what effect that has on my emissions. Then all these sequestration potentials or conservation practices related to tillage, cover crops, and manure applications on the field. Etc. And also having additional trees grown or converted areas back to set aside or forest areas. This is how it's reflected in the tool. Certainly, I would suggest if anyone, because you can create a free account for yourself. So if you just want to test out how the tool works and if you can do what you would like to set up in a project, you can test it out and play around and see what else is there to get it maybe a better grasp of how to do this. Last but not least, the transport section. This is something that actually doesn't cover on-farm transport. So what this is meant for is anything that is transported to the farm. So again, this is a scope 3 emission, what I mentioned before, something that is not your direct emission, but something that you should and is good practice to include in your assessment. So products that you bring to the farm, product you can bring to the farm and sorry, I need to kind of stop these reactions. It's a horrible thing with these thumbs ups and thumbs down. So sorry for this. Exactly. So transport sections, everything that you bring to the farm, and then also you can include anything beyond farm gate. So you could even include when products, your crop products are transported to the next processor, the next buyer, even those emissions can be reflected in a Cool Farm tool by indicating the transport mode and the weights and distances of this transport. Let's go quickly to the results. What I've shown you before, here we go. Here is the product footprint you have. It's the total emissions for the whole scope that you're assessing here for the whole crop, the whole area, that might be your whole farm. And then you get it broken down per hectare. So also a footprint of per hectares and per ton. So those kind of KPIs, so the units are very useful specifically if you want to compare farmers with each other that might have the same practices or not and see how are they performing and just let them learn from each other. And then also see immediately the hotspots where they are and how you can then address those hotspots and implement conservation practices and start reducing emissions. And then also, again, I would say just make an account, play around, see where these, your emissions come from. Production emission of fertilizers are broken down by each type. So also that is a potential here to reduce emissions. And that's it. And then what I mentioned before, the nitrogen use efficiency under the performance tab, we have that value for you. And also the report, the science that this is based on, as well as some other just information and KPIs. The compare functionality that I mentioned before is in here. So again, what you can see, you can really change and compare two assessments with each other. So you can see the increase and the improvements. As I see, I haven't really filled out this assessment, so this is not a good comparison, but yeah, this is something you can do in the tool. So what I would do, maybe one of the things I can just quickly show you water assessment. Just again, if I said there is these drops that you can see that are additional questions for a water assessment. In irrigation, you would look at the start and the stop of irrigation. What I mentioned here, you indicate the water added over a certain time frame, all the irrigation period. And then when going to the results, let's say, hopefully the water footprint works out. Sometimes it doesn't load. Oh, there we go. And then you would have this footprint available for you. So really see how much blue and green matter had been added, what what our requirements are, and what the balance is. So if it's good or not. And then I also want to show you quickly a biodiversity assessment, because that's quick. And then we go finally to a livestock example as well. And then we can go into the Q&A, just an assessment of, I think this one was the one that was taken. Yes. So what I shown before, when I told you about conservation practices, maybe if you are not specifically interested in a greenhouse gas footprint, but rather just conservation practices on farm and that affects biodiversity, you have here this questionnaire really looking at all the practices you do. And basically by doing more, for example, taking one of the questions here, if you have one or more variety of a crop, by having more varieties, if you click it, you can see that your score increases. So basically by following this catalog, you can actually see what can I improve to get a better biodiversity score and have maybe more species of livestock on the green. So with this, you can improve your scoring. And so this is just by going through all of those practices, you can really see what can I do, what can I improve to get my scoring better and benefit biodiversity, right? So this is how it looks like. And then finally, livestock. I'm gonna take a dairy assessment in that sense. Dairy and beef are set up quite fairly similar. Just the difference is basically the production here at the beginning. So we look at the milk produced, the amount of that. So you get not only a total footprint for your dairy farm, but actually you can also see what is the footprint per ton of milk you produced. So again, that's a comparable thing. We look at the herd setup, so different animal categories you have on your farm, how many milk cows you are, other calves you have on the farm, and how they grow. So that's what the live weight does. And we have a grazing section, so looking at how far and how long your cattle actually spends time on the grazing area. You can also assess the emissions from fertilizers that are applied on that grazing area. So that is also included. If you have grazing area and silage production area, this can be included in one assessment. If you produce specific feed items, then you can first assess that as crop and then include it as feed item in the livestock assessment afterwards. So that's great. And makes even footprints more precise and adapted to your own condition and production systems. And then there is some KPIs, whether they are in confined pasture, to assess how much energy is used by the animals, and this affects also enteric fermentation. The feed items, this is the most important section and can be more complex or less complex. There is two ways of reflecting it. You can indicate the average feed use for the entire herd, so what type of feed items you fed to all of them. And that is, let's say, you say the percentage of the feed composition you give to them, that is indicated. Or you can really indicate more precisely how much dry matter intake has been given to the individual animals you indicated in your herd. And that calculates automatically what you can see here. The tool, when you indicate an animal was grazing, it calculates for you the grass consumed. It also calculates for you the emission coming from manure that is deposited on the grassland while they're grazing. So those two things are automatically default calculated by the tool. And then you can add your own feed components. So selecting again from a whole list of feed items. And here so this is important, we use the emission factors to calculate feed emissions from GFLI. It's an internationally recognized database. And so, yeah, and so you can choose these feed items, say how much of dry matter has been consumed by your animal, and here is this deforestation-free option, for example. So this is only available for soy, and also absolutely in the responsibility of the ones who uses this, because you need to guarantee that on your side, somehow there was no change, land use change, no deforestation in the past 20 years. But this is how you can actually take away any kind of emissions coming from land use and from your footprint for feed items. There is feed additives that we have added now for a very simple way, actually what type of feed item you add, and the doses, as well as other indicators for feed additives. The manure management, going to the next slide, energy and processing and transport, we don't have to cover. It's the same that we discussed before. When we talk about manure management, there's a little bit of a downside of what you can do here. So you can talk about how much manure of myself have I managed in one way or the other. So we talk about the volumes. And then you can select again from IPCC management practices, whether that's anaerobic digesters, liquid slurry with cover, pit storages, etc. So you choose how you handle the manure for your different animal types. And here, for example, I would say 60% has been composted in passive windrows or intensive windrows maybe. And then there is also some of it that goes into anaerobic digesters. You can also add if there's any bedding material that you use that can affect your emissions. And then again, energy and processing as well as transport, we have explained this already. So I quickly show you the results, and then I'm gonna stop and we can go into the Q&A. And yeah, maybe we can also show some examples. I'm gonna show you those slides. And how you aggregate data as well. So this is something I still wanted to show. So here are the total emissions, again, broken down to the different sources. And for example, if I have feed production, very high emissions. If I go into that tool, as I told you, we have the save as functionality. I go all the way down. You can create a copy for it and then say, what if I choose another feed item instead of soybean, I choose rapeseed. And also, again, changing the sourcing region for it instead of Belgium, taking it from Austria. So this is how you can really change your emissions, adapt it, see what kind of effect it would have, and then make comparisons and scenario building. Exactly. And then maybe final thing, if you are in an assessment, what I mentioned is this aggregation functionality. So anyone who makes an assessment, if you work, whether that's a farmer, is you as a project manager, you work with a team of agronomists, anyone can make an assessment, make an account, make the assessments in their own account. And then we can, when you have a project, we can establish codings for you. And by basically each and every assessment that is done can be shared with a code that we establish for you. And then we come to this great aggregation functionality that then shows you all the assessments that have been shared within a code. For example, this can be split up by different categories. So you can create folders here to organize shared assessments. And then say, I only want to, have the Spain region or supplier or crop assessments downloaded. And by this, you can generate a report. And that is an Excel file that I wanted to share. But I think I'm not sure if I can switch to another slide. I'm going to stop sharing because I need to stop sharing anyways, the tool. Let me see. Share my screen. And this would be then the report that you get out. So if you really work with the Cool Farm tool, you do not have to make the assessments all yourself. So you could even decide to go and tell the farmers, hey, you fill out the tool for yourself. And so basically by using the share code, they all send the code to you as a project manager, so the main administrator of those shared data. So the only person who can see the data is this person. It's not interchangeable, so you cannot see data of others. So there's privacy, but the ones who really basically has received the shared data can then download these reports and see each assessment in one line everything that has all the input data that is in there. And then at the end, also the emissions broken down for, if I go there, for the different areas such as pesticides, and then always, as I said, as a total, and then for the individual units per kilogram, so per weight and per area. And so this basically is then the way how you compare assessments with each other, aggregate data from different farms for a specific area. You can see where errors could be in the data, and make more, kind of state level, county level footprints, and just direct this also and use this for who is performing better, has a lower footprint, and how you can then learn from each other and maybe introduce conservation practices that worked quite well for some of the farmers. And then finally, maybe because I know the time is short, so actually we have 15 minutes left, which was meant for the Q&A. Let me see again to share my presentation. Share my screen. This data aggregation, this is just a summary. I prepared a few slides that explains you this again, how it works and how it looks like. So there is some information again. And just for the examples that we have for you, these are examples, of course, I know that you work quite on a government level, so it might be that it's specific farmers that you work with. And of course, the examples we have here are more related to companies that are within our membership, but still it's fantastic examples of how they really use the tool to work with farmers. And so we have, for example, Strauss Family Creamery, which is a dairy company working with dairy farmers in their own supply chain. And so it shows you, basically, this comes from our impact report, which you see in the next slide. I've linked to that so you can read really the details of it. And they also show you here on the slide to see what kind of practices have been implemented. So electric vehicles, what type of seaweed, for example, used as feed, using anaerobic digesters and using compost. Those kind of practices have been taken. This is an initiative from Australia, so it's not US, but still it's very useful information because it's large-scale implementation of the Cool Farm tool with various actors. We have Kellogg's, PepsiCo, Mars working together with universities, local purchasers, with the farmers themselves. So it's really large-scale product, over 340,000 hectares. And moving to 200 farmers that are included in this project. So they worked very much on soil testing, very clear understanding of soil structure in the individual areas, and then gave the farmers a catalog of management practices they can implement, but choose themselves what to implement. And so by giving them this freedom, that has worked fantastically, and they also have seen great results where other farmers during drought periods didn't have any harvest, and they actually could harvest. And so those were really great effects and also outcomes of that project. And then there's other two examples, specifically Kinetec, who worked in the US also in this part of the Farmers for Soil Health initiatives, which is kind of financed by the USDA Climate Smart Commodity Grant. And they use the Cool Farm tool as well to have all very millions of acres enrolled in regenerative agriculture, and then use the tool to monitor how that affects the soil health. Looking at the costs, and I know I need to leave 10 minutes for a Q&A. Very sorry for doing it a little bit, taking more time than needed, but specifically there is a membership fee structure on our website. So you see those costs, I've linked it in here. You see those costs available. Of course, we're talking about projects, so that might look different, but you can take that kind of as an assumption of how much could happen depending on how big the project is. So if you use it for very few farmers, very few assessments, you could go in a direction of a small fee pensum, and then it could grow depending on the scope that you have, the assessments you want, your farmers you include. And so we just ask you to contact us if you would like to use the Cool Farm tool in a project, and then we can give you a direction of how much the cost would be. So just consider what would be the scope, how many farmers do you work with, and what you want to use it for. And then this is the final slide we share with you, just where you can find information. There's lots of videos out there, knowledge base and FAQ. So many details on how to use the tool and about the details of it you find there. Our method, as I said, the technical description, our impact report with much more stories of how the tool has been used. And finally, as I said, if you have any questions, always come to us via support@coolfarmtool.org because we direct any kind of questions through that channel. And that's it.
Well done, Michaela. That was excellent. I really enjoyed both presentation and demo. That was terrific. We have 3 questions, and let's get to them right away. And others, don't be shy. Go ahead and take the time to write some questions now. First one is, how does the Cool Farm tool compare to the Comet results? And specifically, Comet Farm was provided as a link. Do you get this question all the time, probably?
Yeah, all the time, not, but yes, of course. So I think it's always very difficult to say how you actually compare different tools with each other. I mean, the Comet, I think there is certain, like IPCC, for example, that's kind of a baseline that both of the tools use. However, Comet Farm is very specific to the US, right? So you might have emission factors that are much more precise and developed specifically for the US, whereas our tool works on a global playing field. And so for emission factors that we take are global emission factors. And so also when you look at the results, sometimes you can't really compare them with each other because the types of questions that are asked, the details are different. So what is the actual goal that you want to achieve? Right. So it might be sometimes more simplicity or less simplicity. And so this is how you could compare the tools with each other. It's just the content and the questions that might differ, and therefore also the results would differ. But there is certainly similarities when it comes, for example, to IPCC baselines, like science that is also used in that side. And again, a good one is, for example, how is soil carbon stock calculated? So we use a methodology and we're going to move to a new one. How does Comet Farm do it? I think it would be worth to look at the methodologies in depth if you want to have specific information on it. I hope that answers the question. But certainly we know the Comet Farm and we always say, what I always like to say, we very much appreciate any kind of tool that is out there and shares knowledge about the mitigation potential in agriculture. So whatever tool you use that fits your need and feels good, is specifically scientifically credible. So you really can see it's based on good science and not just individual private studies. That should give you confidence to use a specific tool. And then whatever tool you use, do it and act on it, use it for conservation practices and go out to the field and take action, because that's what we are all about and want to achieve. And so any tool is good that is scientifically robust. Yeah.
Excellent. We've got 7 minutes left. And for some reason, my sound might be a little bit echoey. Is that the case?
Yes, exactly. I try to understand. I still can't understand you, but it's echo, yeah.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and take a look at the questions and take the ones you want to just proceed through the questions if you would.
Okay, I'm gonna go through the Q&A. Indeed, I see them in front of me. So if the tool includes leakage, very good question. So we do not include leakage. What does leakage mean for some of you who might not know? It's about if, for example, you include certain conservation practice and you decide to take some part of your cultivated land away and make it, for example, a set-aside land, right? What does that actually mean, however, if you then take another area somewhere else in the world and start cultivating your crop there, and that again creates emissions. So it's not really that maybe you avoid it in one place, but then you create emissions in a second place. And so we do not cover this. We cannot cover that. It's a requirement, for example, from the GHG protocol, that how you can reflect that. So you could look into that report of the greenhouse gas protocol to see how companies should do it. But we do not cover this effect of taking away a part of your cultivated land, but then creating emissions somewhere else. Unfortunately. but we are aware of it and certainly know if there is a possibility for us in the future of how to translate that, we would go about it. Then the next question would be, what is the main scientific basis for biodiversity assessment? Very nice question. It's a combination of science taken from conservation evidence. That's a database created by Cambridge University about species groups around the globe and specifically the biomes that we cover. And so also we know that certain, let's say activities benefit these types of species groups. And that conservation evidence knowledge is coupled with expert judgment. So a large group of experts have been invited when we developed the methodology and knowing at their specific local knowledge. Then the scoring system that I've shown you has been developed to see what can be beneficial and not. That's kind of a combination of the scientific basis for it. And again, as I said in a technical description, you'll find really more details on also the biodiversity methodology. The next question is if the CoolFarm tool is accepted as methodology for carbon standards. If so, which ones? We do not have any accreditation or acceptation currently, and that specifically is due to the fact that we still have a tier 1 sequestration methodology. And also because we were always quite cautious when working with carbon certification and let's say carbon credits, because we know of the difficulties for permanency of certain practices if you're not certain if this actually happens in the future. And also, wait a second, yeah, exactly. And one of the things we want to do, however, we want to go and connect with CARS. So we are in contact and clear contact with the, for example, gold standard. We are also already started discussions and will make discussions closer with Vera, for example, once we have updated our soil organic carbon model. So I think that for us is really the alignment with the GHG protocol is the first priority we have currently. And then the update to our new methodology specifically on soil organic carbon is going to be our landing point from where we want to take up this discussion with standards and see if our tool really can be used for those as well. Because up until then it might be difficult, but then I think we're very confident on a scientific level that it can be used for standards. So I really would say and watch that space and follow us, because for us it will be very exciting to do so and not assume something, but actually be clear that it's a good method to use for it. And then what if a stakeholder engagement was done in development of the tool? I'm not sure if I understand that 100%. Also, wait a second, I just need to my light. Let's see if this works better, because in the meantime it turned dark in my country. What if any stakeholder engagement was done in development of the tool? Well, generally, if we develop a tool, it comes through our membership. So we have a decision-making process where our members are involved in the development. And also sometimes it comes from outside. So people just suggesting us this would be a very important thing to do. And then it's going through our science advisory council if it's worth, a scientific review and really see, is this important science that we should include? And then we take those scientists into the stakeholder, like basically the engagement throughout the development. And also in the testing phase, we often always include our members and groups that are maybe the best ones to tell us if the development is successful or not. So we take that into consideration, and our members as well, because they represent the industry. And so we have a member advisory council who then gives prioritization to certain improvements and also to the development itself. Yeah, and that's it. Do users often plug their CoolFarm raw data into other tools? Second, sorry for this. Well, yeah, normally people have to type in data. So it's manual data entry. there is not an Excel upload and so on. So I'm not sure if that's what you mean, but yes, there is raw data. So for us, it's not, it's maybe just part of the data, maybe just default data, but most of the data we enter is manual entry, and so is first hand primary data that is entered and not proxy data. And so this can be done on a manual basis. And then there is this API connections that I said that can be used to send it into the tool. And so data processing is much faster. And therewith they plug in their information actually through other tools and management softwares. I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Michelle, do you want to pull up the last slide? I don't want to hold anybody up any longer. This was great. So thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. Here are some next steps in our collective outcomes quantification journey. First, we look forward to joining us at some or all of the next set of tool training webinars that will be held the first Wednesday of every month, except possibly July. We might move that one. If you can't make it to one or more of the webinars but want to view the sessions, the recording should be available by the following Monday. Second, at the end of the webinar, please share your feedback with us by answering that quick 8-question survey that I shared at the beginning of the session. It will also appear as a new tab in your internet browser when the webinar ends. Please take a couple of minutes to share your feedback so we can keep improving these events. And don't forget that you will be entered into a drawing for a gift card just for filling out the survey. So we thank you in advance for your participation and good luck. Also, Michelle and I are offering free coaching sessions to 6 farm project managers who secure a session with us. These sessions are individually tailored to you in order to help you in your outcomes estimation journey. So if you're interested, just email me, Aisha Tapross, and in the subject line, write coaching request. And finally, if you'd like a free print copy of the guide to be mailed to you, you can place that order online at the report's website, which you can easily find using the keywords AFT Outcomes Tools. So thank you again for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you on April 3rd. And I am sharing the registration page now.
Thank you so much again, Michaela. This was fantastic. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Lots of information, but hopefully it was interesting. Thanks a lot for being here, and for all of the participants that are still there. Thanks for joining, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.